The SEGA Saturn is a great system, often let down by its complicated architecture causing many headaches for developers. Couple this with some very weird marketing and you've got one hell of a failure in Western markets.
Please, don't disappoint him. He doesn't like that.
So today I want to recommend a few games to anyone new to collecting for the system. Obviously I'm going to avoid the stupidly expensive stuff too, so let's take a look. First on the list is Exhumed, or Power Slave Exhumed, or if you're in Japan, 1999 AD, Resurrection of the Pharaoh. No idea why it had so many names. Anyway, this game was released back in 1996 on the Saturn, before eventually coming to PC and then PlayStation. Yeah, this game launched first on the Saturn. It's kind of like how that popular PlayStation game Tomb Raider actually came out on Sega's system first. So did this popular PC game. I guess it pays to have a console that people actually buy if you want a very solid FPS game to be known as a Saturn one. Now, this Egyptian-themed shooter was developed by Lobotomy Software, the company that brought the super impressive ports of Quake and Duke Nukem to the Saturn. Would have been nice if they got Doom, but what are you going to do, expect a quality port of one of the most important games of all time? Not a chance. That ain't the Sega way. Anyways, what sets this game apart from those ports is that this is their own original game, and is of course running on the Slave Driver engine. At least for the console version, the PC port is just straight up build engine. This game has since been re-released, and I'm aware that copies of this game in the US are stupidly expensive, but hey, at least in my part of the world, you can get this game for less than a slab of piss and a pack of Winnie Blues, so let's get into it. Exhumed starts off strong setting up the story with a killer voiceover by Don LaFontaine. I have no idea if I pronounced that right, but yeah, the general gist of things is that some seriously fucked up shit is going down in the city of Karnak in the late 20th century. Apparently the joint has been invaded by alien creatures or some shit who are murdering and torturing the villagers. Even the mummified remains of King Ramses was unearthed and moved from his tomb. This is where we come in.
You have been chosen from a group of the best operatives in the world to infiltrate Karnak and destroy the threatening forces. But as your helicopter nears the Karnak Valley, it is shot down. You barely escape with your life. With no possible contact to the outside world, you begin your adventure, ready to accomplish your mission, praying to return alive.
So we run into Ghost Ramses, who needs us to find a bunch of artifacts to help him out. This, along with finding a handful of radio transmitter parts, is basically the entire point of the game. Not 100% essential to get all these radio parts, but you'll want to find them if you want to get the good ending. No spoilers. Now, finding these artifacts will grant you special abilities throughout the game that allow you to access different parts of levels. You'll also be needing to find plenty of keys to get to certain parts of levels, which was the style at the time, and there's plenty of backtracking to go along with it. There is a map screen that you'll use to travel between areas, and certain parts of levels you'll only be able to access when you have the right ability unlocked. There are other temporary abilities like stronger weapons and invisibility, which again was the style at the time. I don't mind a bit of backtracking as it's not too bad here. The levels aren't that massive, but one thing that is kind of weird is the ammo situation. You've got a health bar like a normal game, but instead of picking up ammo, you pick up weapon power. This means that whatever weapon you have equipped is the one that gets more power when you get these blue thingers. It's certainly different. I mean, I don't hate it, I'm just surprised that that's what they chose to go with. Hey, at least they tried something new, so I won't complain. Combat itself is what you'd expect from a game of this era. The controls on console do take some getting used to. I mean, the platforming has always made me panic because there's no checkpoint system and things can get a little bit hard to handle in super close encounters, but other than that, perfectly serviceable. Enemy and weapon variety will expand throughout the game as expected, but get used to these little buggers everywhere. I will say it's very satisfying to take out a bunch of enemies with the machine gun, but hey, the weapons overall have a pretty good feel. The graphics are pretty damn good too. They go for the reliable method of 2D sprites and 3D environments, which always has plenty of charm. Some areas can look a little bit too plain, but it makes up for it in other parts. There's a heavy use of lighting effects here too, and they make it look fantastic for the time. The game runs pretty well too, all things considered. If this was dished off to a lesser developer, it would probably be a fucking slideshow, but the frame dips don't hurt general gameplay at all. At least to someone like me who doesn't have a 60 FPS or death attitude. What we've got here is a great first-person shooter for a system that didn't have enough of them to begin with, so you've got to soak it up while you've got them. Definitely give this one a go.
Fighting Vipers.
Now, I could have picked a lot of different fighters, and I'm sure they'd slot right in, but this is the only one that I actually owned for the Sega Saturn. Fighting Vipers. This game is of course the Japanese version, which, along with another game on this list, I only have in place of the PAL version because I bought them in Japan, so don't worry, PAL versions aren't too expensive. Now, Fighting Vipers got its start as an arcade game in '95, before getting home ports on the Saturn across the board in '96. This game also got a PS2 release as part of the Sega Ages line, and even some 7th gen ports for the PS3 and 360. Aside from that, it's playable in the Judgment games as the standard arcade release. While this game isn't widely well known now, it did well enough to get a sequel, but aside from it 2 making an appearance in Like a Dragon, it never got a later release like the original did, so this is stuck in arcades and on Dreamcast. Back to the original though, this game's development was led by the one and only Yu Suzuki, and uses the same engine as Virtua Fighter 2. As we know, people still to this day write the Saturn off as a weak 3D machine, likely because Virtua Fighter was hardly a showcase, but this game really showed that the Saturn was very capable. The character models look great here, there's tons of detail, and the movement is fluid. On top of that, we've got destructible armor that explodes off your opponent when damaged enough. Although I do question the protection that some of these characters were actually getting in the first place. The levels themselves look great as well, although the walls around the stages do have a tendency to pop in and out around the edges. This is a little distracting, but at least they're also destructible. If you or your opponent manages to land a strong enough blow near the end of a fight, someone may just go flying out of the ring. It's pretty awesome when this happens. It's such a cool way to end a fight. It took me a while to get back into the feel of this game. These kinds of games aren't really my go-to, but when I started landing solid hits, it got really satisfying. You can use the training mode to get a grip on things like any fighting game, but there's also a playback mode for saved fights. Pretty neat. Grappling can feel a bit slow and clunky, however, aside from that, I really enjoyed the feel of this game, but I haven't even gotten to the best part yet, and it's only included in the Japanese Saturn release. There's a certain character in this game that only the cool kids know how to unlock. If you aren't super cool like me, well, that's too bad. I'm sure you've noticed all the Pepsi ads in this game. Well, guess who shows up? Yep, motherfucking Pepsi Man. If you throw a round without attacking, this guy shows up, and if you beat him, you can now play through the entire game as Pepsi Man, which I did because why the fuck wouldn't you? It's a little disappointing that the game Pepsi Man was only released on PS1, because that game isn't too shabby for a straight up advertisement, and while it's strange to have all this advertising in this one version of the game, it's absurd enough that I'm not really bothered by it, more just confused. His special kick is rather handy, and after a solid effort on my end, I managed to get through the entire game in just under 8 minutes. A time that I'm sure is absolutely abysmal. This is pretty much all there is to it too. There's no plot here, it's just characters. There are some random pictures that show up during the credits that you can also see in the gallery after completing the game, some of which are incredible by the way, but other tthan that, we just get this super crunchy pre-rendered video showing off all the characters, accompanied by a great jam. Overall, Fighting Vipers is a neat 3D fighter for the Saturn that doesn't offer much depth outside of just being a straight up fighting game that is also great to look at. If that's all you're after, then give this one a go. Next up, we've got Loaded, a science fiction themed top-down multi-directional shooter by Gremlin Interactive. Do note that a body bag is not included with this game, and things are about to get messy. Now, this game was initially released on the PlayStation in the US at the end of 1995, and got ported over to the Saturn later in 1996, with both releases getting a fairly mixed reception overall. This certainly isn't a perfect game, nor is it the best game on this list. Not selling this very well, am I? It's certainly decent, trust me. An interesting thing to note, based on my usual lazy amount of research I put into games I cover, this game's impressive use of dynamic lighting inspired lobotomy software to put it in their console ports of Exhumed. How neat is that? Mentioning that, I may as well start with the graphics here. We've once again got a 3D environment with 2D sprites. The 3D renders they use are pretty cool, and you can easily make out what everything is, given the camera setup we've got going on here. That's not to say there isn't plenty of 3D work going on here. There's heaps of boxes and shit that are all destructible, and things like turrets are all 3D too. Where this game really excels is the detailed environments though. They really nailed the grimy details in the levels, and they give you exactly what you expect. A lot of blood. The maps are big and a lot of it can start to look a bit samey. Obviously there's going to be limitations with that, but you do have a very handy map to tell you where you've been, and levels do start to change up a fair bit after you pass the first few. Play long enough and you might get slapped with some cutscenes too. As expected, these are mighty crunchy and just serve as little A to B videos between levels. Don't go expecting anything too in-depth here. As far as plot goes, there is one, but it's entirely summarised on the back of the box, and you can just put the pieces together with the rest of it. Mama, Bouncer, Butch, Fwank, Captain Hands, and Vox have apparently all been wrongfully imprisoned, and it's time to break out and get revenge. Pretty much all the motivation we need to kill everyone inside this prison, and seemingly anything else that steps in our way. I don't know how the two-player works, but aside from a potential partner, you won't be finding any friends along the way here. It's just straight up kill everything. The game encourages you to do so too, especially in these early levels where you have to find a handful of keys to get around and make it to the next elevator. In doing so, you'll want to get to every room, and this game doesn't skimp on enemies, there's baddies around every corner. You'll get some variation with enemies too, they all go down fast, but it's numbers you gotta worry about here. The rats are a fucking pain in the ass though. I can deal with a bit of respawn, but the levels these fuckers are in just get really annoying when you're constantly swarmed. Aside from that though, it's all pretty good. It just feels like an updated Smash TV in a lot of ways, with temporary upgrades, quick respawns, extreme violence, all the good stuff. Getting swarmed is expected, but any character you choose has their own special attack, which can help you get out of sticky situations. The initial levels are filled with cramped hallways, which add to their atmosphere, but the game does start to open up once you get outside, so don't get turned off thinking by the third level that it's not going to mix things up. The soundtrack to this game is killer too. I was vibing out, playing this to the point that I forgot to turn the sound effects up at first, so you could mostly only hear music early on. I love these classic 90s soundtracks though, it's just cheesy goodness. Really the letdown here is the performance. The game can feel unstable, but at least it's still playable as it is. The controls are fine once you get a grip on the strafing, and the frame rate being all over the place doesn't really cause any significant issues. At the end of the day, this game isn't the best on the list, but it's a fun arcadey style action game that doesn't get bogged down by any big concepts. It's just pure violence. What more do you need? Now, this is certainly going to look like an odd one to chuck on this list, but trust me, this game is awesome. Baku Baku, or Baku Baku Animal as it's known in Japan, was released in arcades in 1995, then brought to the Saturn in 96. On top of a Saturn port, this game made its way to the Master System and Game Gear, which is hardly surprising given they're basically the same under the hood. Apparently there was a mobile phone version years later too, which is just hilarious to me, but something a bit more expected by today's standards is the PC release. These days you'll have plenty of console exclusives, either releasing day one on PC or a little while later, but back then companies weren't so excited by the idea. This wasn't something they did with every game, but they did have a division solely dedicated to doing this. I imagine to just try and claw some cash back. How well these games did generally, I have no idea, but they were clearly onto something, and with the cost of games now, it's all the rage these days. Anyway, I should probably actually talk about the game itself. This is your standard Tetris style game that adds its own little quirks into the mix. Here we have to match up the animal with their preferred food types and get sick combos. That's pretty much it. You'd think if these animals were that hungry, they'd eat just about anything, so we'll take off some points for the lack of realism on display here. Seriously though, I think this is a really fun system that adds a bit of charm into the mix. It's hardly a groundbreaking experience for the era, but I play games to have fun, so it's not always about looking for technical brilliance. As far as game modes go, it's all pretty standard affair. You have a ranked mode, which is just seeing how far you can get, and that's a fun challenge, but in the main mode, it's just straight up what you'd get in the arcade without eating up all of your money. I mean, I spent $35 on this game that I've played hours of. I'd hate to think what it would set me back to get that time in the arcade. This copy also came with a page someone printed off for a code over 25 years ago. I love finding this sort of shit. You can adjust the difficulty however you like, which makes it accessible for people at any skill level, and if you want to add a little bit of extra chaos in the mix like me, you can play with up to 5 different animals. There is a 2-player mode here if you have friends to play with. I don't have friends, so we're running into this solo. Oh, and there is an actual plot here, because back then, even the most basic of basic arcade-style puzzle games needed a fucking story to move us along. So, old mate here goes to his king and is all like, your dumbass fucking daughter wants a new pet, but he's all like, fuck that shit, if she wants more pets, we need to hire a zookeeper. So old mate runs off to put the ad out for this tournament to the death, I assume, and the winner gets to be the zookeeper. Now, we rock up and just blitz the competition. Even the princess herself gets a taste of these hands before we take our rightful place as the royal zookeeper. Then the game ends even weirder than it started with this hilarious cutscene of us meeting the animals. Yeah, the graphics in this game are something else. It's all pre-rendered 3D models slapped over this 2D game, and while it may be fucking jarring in modern times, I think it looks goofy enough to win me over. Like, yeah, the 3D here looks shit, even for the time, but come on, this victory screen is fucking incredible. I will say though, the 2D, 3D mix on the actual game board looks genuinely good, and the game overall has a rather unique style to it. There's not much else to really say about this one. It's a basic game that is easy to pick up for 30 minutes to an hour here and there, and it provides a decent challenge that was absolutely worth the money I spent on it. This one's an easy choice, but of course I had to chuck it in here. It's fucking Sega Rally Championship. I don't need to tell any Sega fan how awesome this game is. You already know, and even all these years later, it's easy to see why this is such a beloved game, both in the arcade and at home. While this first released in 1995, this classic racer has been ported to a few systems over the years, including PC like Baku Baku, PS2 as part of Sega Rally 06, Game Boy Advance got a version, and even the fucking N-Gage copped this one. The Saturn version is obviously the most well-known outside of the arcades, releasing after a questionable port of Daytona USA, which is still fun but was very undercooked. Where that game suffered from issues with frame rate and draw distance, this game was able to take advantage of the hardware far better and provide a much smoother experience. A release like this really shows how Sega tripped at the starting line with the Saturn release. The system is very capable and should have given the masses something far better straight off the bat. But it wasn't until late 1995 that Japan and the US would even get this as an apology. Even worse is that Europe, and by extension the Aussies, had to wait till early 1996 to get this in their hands. Of course it proved to be quite the success, and it's easy to see why when you see some of the other lazy crap that got released for the console. Now, on the surface, we've got a very good arcade conversion. Graphics are great for the hardware, and much of what we expect to see is kept intact. The game does offer more freedom as you'd expect, with some welcome additions to the options menu. You can mess around with a few settings like handling, difficulty, the amount of laps that you have to run in arcade mode. Hell, you can even go through and change the music tracks that play for each stage, and you better believe the soundtrack to this game kicks fucking ass. There's not a lot of depth, and things like car tuning got greatly expanded on in the sequel, which I covered in a separate video, which you should totally go and check out. Anyway, here it's all fairly bare bones, but it's a great start to a series that really should have gotten more games. That's just Sega doing Sega things though, I guess. Game modes are all standard affair here. There's a 2-player battle mode, otherwise jumping straight into the arcade mode is where it's at. Now you only have a choice of 2 cars here, and while yes, the Celica is fucking cool, a couple more options would have been nice. Unlike every other racing game, I usually just play this one auto rather than manual. I feel like the shifting just isn't as satisfying here, but the game more than makes up for it with the overall control that it gives you. Anyone who's played this game will know what I'm talking about when I say this game is very smooth to control. The steering fits so well with the design of the game, so while things are floaty, the game never feels broken. It's a very tight experience that still holds up in that regard. What helps it greatly is the compatibility with a 3D control pad. Yeah, it's not tight analog control, but it doesn't matter because it already makes it feel that much better. Now, this game is let down a bit by not having more tracks, but the levels themselves are great as you'd expect. I do suck at this game, so I didn't unlock the extra track, but I do enjoy tackling the main 3 in the time attack mode, where I can really see how bad I am. Overall, the lack of levels makes it more suited to short bursts of playtime. The game does exactly what it sets out to do. It brings Sega Rally to a home console and does a bloody fine job of doing it. It isn't a dear one to pick up, so I highly recommend this one to any arcade racing fan.
Finish!
Well, there's a list of games that I hope gets people inspired and not discouraged with the Saturn. Not everything has to cost an arm and a leg with this system, and a lot of these games are still really fun. So tell me what you think, and I'll catch you next time.